Welcome back guys to another Diablo 4 video. Instead of showing you just another build every week, I want to show you something which is much more important. I want to show you how the whole damage for every character in this game is actually going to be calculated by the game. A lot of websites actually have a very good approach on how the damage is calculated in Diablo 4, but they leave you a lot of room for interpretation and mistakes you can make when focusing on certain perks. So this will be the simplest and most comprehensible damage guide for every character in Diablo 4. And as usual, I won't include any seasonal content, so it works in any realm, no matter where you play, no matter when you watch this video. Of course, you can also add seasonal content if you're playing a seasonal character, but it is not needed to use and understand all these basic mechanics. To understand how the damage is calculated in Diablo 4, we first have to take a look at all those skill sheets. On every skill sheet, no matter if you use a basic skill, a core skill or even an ultimate skill, there's a damage value written on this sheet, which is the basic damage you will deal when you use this skill, before any of those multipliers like critical damage, vulnerable damage or overpower are added. No matter how high your critical damage, your vulnerable damage is, you could actually get more if you have just focused a bit more on your basic skill damage. But luckily, the game actually shows you how you increase this number by adding the skills and perks which increases it. So no matter what increases your basic skill, your core skill or ultimate skills, it should be prioritized, because this is your basic damage value. If you're playing the rogue class, you can of course also use combo points to increase your core skill damage, but you can achieve the same value with using just core skill damage on your items. Focusing on your skill sheet damage is very important to understand the damage buckets in Diablo 4. There's a total of 4 different damage buckets in Diablo 4. Let's call the first one, for comprehensive reasons, the skill damage bucket. The second one is critical damage, the third one is vulnerable damage, and the fourth one is overpower damage. All these 4 buckets are separate multipliers. So your skill bucket is multiplied by your critical damage bucket, that is multiplied by vulnerable, and that is multiplied if you manage to get an overpower kill. The last 3 skill buckets are really easy to understand, because everything that is labeled overpower damage goes into the overpower damage bucket, everything that is labeled vulnerable damage goes into vulnerable, and any of those critical damage with imbued, critical damage with whatever goes into the critical damage bucket. The first one is way more difficult to understand, because basically everything else goes into this bucket. But there are some perks which we will call the good damage perks. The good damage perks are everything that is permanently increasing your skills, such as basic skill damage, core skill damage, all damage, your main stat, which is nothing else than all damage technically, marksman skill damage, cutthroat skill damage, or whatever skill damage you have for another class. All of these are the good ones which are permanently added and permanently increasing your skill damage. These are also the skills which are listed on top of your skill sheet, and they will also increase your skill damage value whenever you increase one of them. They are also equal and exchangeable. 1% all damage is the same as 1% core skill damage, and 1% core skill damage is the same as 1% marksman skill damage if it happens to be a marksman skill, of course. So focusing on everything that is increasing your basic skill damage plus critical damage, vulnerable and overpower damage is the basic axis you should focus on. Of course, you can totally neglect overpower if you don't have any opportunity to do this in your build. But this is basically the main axis you should focus on. And then of course we have the bad damage perks, which are the situational ones. Damage to, damage versus, damage while, damage to chill, damage to frozen. All these are situational bonuses. They also go all on top of your skill damage, where everything starts to be calculated with. But they are added only temporarily and only for those enemies who meet the requirement, so they are called the bad ones. We have good damage perks inside this bucket, and we have bad damage perks which you should avoid. The good ones are core skill and everything that permanently increases your damage. So neglecting anything that permanently increases your damage is a big flaw. Of course you should neglect the bad ones, but you should not neglect any of the good damage multipliers. Otherwise your skills would end up being less powerful than they could be. But not all of the damage 2 perks are entirely rubbish. There are some which are way better than others. There are 12 different types of crowd control in Diablo 4. Stun, dazed, knockback, knockdown, chilled, frozen, whatever. And every single type of crowd control has its own damage 2 perk. But there is one perk that covers it all, which is damage to crowd control. It covers all those 12 types. So no matter what type of crowd control you apply to your enemies, damage to crowd control will always be applied, which makes it one of the most favorable perks of all of these. But what about those 25% X or 20% X multipliers from paragon board and aspects? They will either multiply an entire damage bucket, such as your entire critical damage, or they will only multiply a part of your damage buckets. So that will result in certain perks and certain multipliers being a lot stronger than others. For example, the Frostbite multiplier will simply multiply your entire critical damage. Precision is multiplying your entire critical damage and your entire vulnerable damage. And every time a multiplier multiplies an entire damage bucket, it is mathematically the same as it would multiply your entire damage. That is why those multipliers are extremely powerful and the ones you should focus on. However, using the X multipliers is not always the best option. If you're having 300% damage in your basic skill bucket and you would add another 300% damage to crowd control, this will literally double your damage. Or if we are using 300% critical damage and we are adding another 30% critical damage on top of it, this would be actually the same as if we would use another 10x multiplier for our critical damage. These stackable bonuses, if high enough, can actually outperform a smaller X bonus. So in general, if you are focusing on the main damage axis and getting the good damage perks and focusing on the right multipliers, you will get the highest possible damage. Then of course you can spice up your build by getting damage to crowd control or getting damage to close or distant targets, whatever fits your build best. Additionally to your skills and perks, attack speed will have also a major impact on your damage, but not in a good way, but actually rather in a bad way. If you're focusing on faster shooting weapons, it will actually dramatically lower your damage. A fast shooting weapon will always place you on a lower damage trajectory, and the slower weapon will always have the higher damage per hit and starting on a much higher damage trajectory. And this small difference, which is caused by your attack speed, will just snowball into a huge damage gap when you level up and add all the damage multipliers. So no matter what character you actually play, to get the highest possible damage, you should always use the slower weapon. You can always make your slower weapons attack faster, but you will never be able to compensate the damage loss of a fast shooting weapon. Of course, we also have to talk about lucky hit chance, and I will also try to make this as simple as all the other explanations. Every skill has a lucky hit chance printed on its skill sheet. If you don't see any of these additional tips, make sure you activate the advanced tooltips in your options. In general, basic skills have a higher lucky hit chance than core skills, and there are even some skills that have a 100% lucky hit chance. But 100% lucky hit doesn't mean you trigger all the lucky hit effects every time, because the lucky hit chance from an attack is multiplied with the lucky hit chance of that ability you want to trigger. If you have a 20% lucky hit chance of your skill and you only have a 5% lucky hit chance of a certain thing to happen, then you have to multiply 20% with 5%, and that will give you only a chance of 1% of this specific thing to happen. So you should never combine a low lucky hit chance skill with a low lucky hit chance ability. If you are using a low lucky hit chance skill such as rapid fire or anything that has only around 20 or 25%, then you have to use a high lucky hit chance ability. However, if you have a high lucky hit skill, such as a basic skill which often have over 60 or 80%, then you can also trigger one of those small 5% lucky hit abilities. Another misconception about lucky hit chance is that increasing your lucky hit chance doesn't work as you would expect. If you have plus 15% lucky hit, it doesn't add on the existing 20%. It will multiply it by 15%. So you won't get 35% lucky hit chance from your skill, you will instead get only 23. That also means when you use a lucky hit chance potion, it will also just multiply your base lucky hit chance for that skill, giving you just a mere 6 percentage points if the skill has a very low chance. But lucky hits can be extremely awesome if you have a skill that has a higher chance or if you just attack a lot more often. You just have to be careful and avoid mixing it with the wrong skills. So whenever you make a build in Diablo 4, no matter which class you play, you should always double check if a stackable bonus is actually better or worse than an X modifier. That is especially crucial on the paragon board, where it is actually easy to just grab another legendary node, which gives you a 10x or 20x multiplier, but you could also just invest all of these points to get way more stackable damage, which would in return maybe even better. Especially everything that boosts your skill damage, such as all damage, core damage, or even the basic damage skill nodes if you want to play with basic skills. And of course, critical damage and vulnerable damage must be prioritized. And it is really important to max out these glyphs because another 30% on 300 is similar to having a 10x modifier to your entire damage. Of course, there are also good legendary nodes that give you an instant 25 or 20x multiplier like the cheap shot node, so definitely get those. I hope you really liked this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like, and see you next time.